What's up, comic and pop culture fans? This is James with minthuntercomics, and today we're going to talk taboo. We're talking comic covers and stories that ruffled more than a few feathers. From common thugs and villains giving racially insensitive remarks, to blatant racism coming from the lips of some of our favorite characters, to misogyny and sexism, and depictions of graphic or subtle innuendos, we're going to be looking at history's 100 most controversial comics. Before we get into this video, I want you guys to like this video and comment down below what comic cover can you just simply not believe got past editing. For the purposes of keeping today's video random and fun, we're going to not do this in any particular order. We are going to start off with Flash 343. Here we've got a zombified hand coming from the ground, but the placement is just all wrong. It looks like a giant hand feeling up Flash's lawyer. Perhaps a lawsuit would arise from this in a way that the cover title didn't mean. Up next, we have one of my favorite ones on the list for its sheer ridiculousness. We have Adventure Comics 415, one of the several ones on this list that are doing our girl Supergirl dirty. This is one of the rapiest vibe covers I've seen and that you will see on this list. It depicts Supergirl passed out being dragged into the bedroom chambers of these villains while everybody stares and watches. You want to talk about comics that couldn't get made today? Here we go. Next one, and one of my most favorites on the list because of I just don't understand how this got printed. We have My Struggle. If that sounds a little similar to Mein Kampf, well, you're not wrong. Right around this era, they started drawing Sinestro with a bit of a more Hitler aesthetic, which is one of the reasons where Ethan Van Sciver, the longtime artist for Green Lantern, decided to call this sketchbook My Struggle, based off of Adolf Hitler's memoirs. Once again, an apology had to be issued, and this is a low print count, but if you get your hands on it, you might be sitting on some gold. Up next, we're verging into weird. We've got X-Statix number 15. Not long after Princess Diana's death did this cover come out, depicting her jumping and hopping in an explosive manner, which most people deemed was in bad taste. Action Comics 900. Superman renounces his US citizenship. Fed up with everybody viewing him as a statement for America, he decides to be more Mr. Worldwide. And he comes out saying, you know what? I'm going to be working for the world now, not just the US. A lot of people felt that it hurt our nationalism as a country. Next up, we got Cyber Frog, Reservoir Frog number 2 variant. That doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, does it? Here we got another one in bad taste. Another Ethan Van Sciver cover, limited to 1,000 copies, just like My Struggle. This time he's in hot water because he shows Kurt Cobain, the lead singer of Nirvana, who died by a gunshot wound to his head, right on the cover. Oof. Betty and Me number 16, and one of my favorite covers on this list. Key Collector Comics calls it a highly collectible hilarity. On the cover it shows, Archie, did you have any trouble rescuing me? I sure did, Betty. I had to beat off 3 other guys. Next up, 2080 Prague, number 72. This was a banned issue within the 25-part maxi series, The Cursed Earth. Burger Wars infringed on multiple food chain trademarks, including Ronald McDonald being depicted as a violent gang member. This next one's an oddball one. We've got Lobo, and no, I'm not talking about the main man. In the 60s, they had a only 2-issue arc of a character named Lobo, an African-American man that did not conform to racial stereotypes of the time, and was actually the leading man in a Western. It was canceled after 2 issues because people just couldn't handle the fact that a black dude wasn't playing up the stereotypes back then. Who knows where this book could have gone? This paved the way for generations to come of diversity in comics. Sadly, the world just wasn't ready. Up next, with Green Lantern 85, we have not only classic, iconic, but also controversial. Green Arrow's Ward Speedy is found to be on hardcore drugs. This was an intentional, meaningful issue about the drug epidemic in America at the time. It also happened to kick off the Bronze Age into a darker age of writing, which rejected playing things safe. Up next, we have Life with Archie 36, The Death of Archie. A classic character since 1941 gets killed off, and his death portrayed prominently on the front cover shocked many people, including my mother. Within the pages, you find that he dies in order to save his openly gay friend and senator, adding a little extra taboo to this already taboo cover. Fans were shocked and outraged all across the country. Bringing it back to another classic cover, we've got Iron Man 128, the Tony Stark as an alcoholic cover. From the same era of Green Lantern 85, this is when stories were being pushed. Characters were starting to get visible, more human-like character flaws. In the case of Tony Stark, you had alcoholism. A lot of people didn't like seeing Tony like this. It actually is a pretty great read these many years later. Anyone who knows comics knows about this next one. This is the 1 in 50 variant of Spider-Woman #1. None of this makes sense. The length of her back, the deepness of her butt canyon, the exaggerated heart shape, it simply makes no sense anatomically, and it is memorable for all the wrong reasons. It's become a laughable representation of misogyny in modern American comics. Another controversial cover here. People around this time were not comfortable seeing a hanging Robin in Batman 246. They found the imagery quite shocking and haunting to younger viewers. Next up, probably the most recent entry on this list, and one that I'm pretty excited about because I actually have a couple copies of these and I didn't know it. Immortal Hulk #43. This was a very controversial issue for a couple panels, one including a window pane on a shop stenciled with the word Jewery instead of jewelry and portraying a Star of David, a Jewish religious symbol. After accusations of anti-Semitism, they had to release a statement saying that it was an accident, and Marvel has offered comic shops replacements for the error. Next up, we have a comic that I can't even show you the picture of, but I googled it, and sure enough, yeah, it's pretty shocking. Here we have The Dead, #2, variant cover by Jason Moore. I can't really tell you why this is on this list. All you can do is Google this and you'll see what I'm talking about. Next up we got Spider-Man and Power Pack #1. Who likes to think of Peter Parker as being touched inappropriately when he was a kid? Oh, no one? Oh, okay, well maybe they should have told the writers that back here. It's the first and only appearance of Skip Westcott, a teenage neighbor who inappropriately touched Peter when he was a young boy. And what's interesting is it's never been debunked. This may still be something that canonically has happened to Peter Parker. Here we got Matrix, one of my favorite movies ever, the comic book preview. It was a 16-page promotional intended to be a giveaway at the movie theater, but it was recalled for excessive violence, even worse than the actual movie. Up next, you know there's going to be some golden age here, and we got it here with World's Finest #14. Here we have a seemingly innocent at the time Superman, Batman, and Robin taking a little off time to hang with the boys in the lake. The only problem is, none of the boys in the pond are shown with any sort of clothing on. Many people felt that this was an inappropriate representation of Superman and Batman, maybe a little bit less so Robin. Next up, another more recent one on the list, we've got Astonishing X-Men 51. We get this classic cover of X-Men 51 showing an openly gay Marvel marriage. The first openly gay Marvel marriage to ever make it onto a cover. I guess a lot of butthurt fanboys didn't like their masculinity being so in check. Another more modern entry with Ultimates #3, Issue 3. Wolverine, who in this universe is possibly Wanda and Pietro's father, watches their incestuous relationship from the bushes. You didn't mishear anything I just said. Yes, Wanda is in love with her brother Pietro, and their father Wolverine is watching from the bushes. How did this happen? Horrific #2, which is a band cover art that bleakly suggests that humanity is nothing but a puppet show performed by ghoulish parental archetypes where the father is brainless and the mother is sadistic. Next up, you knew this was going to make it onto the list at some point. We have Killing Joke, which happens to be probably one of the best Batman one-shots ever made. There is a scene, however, in which not only does Joker iconically paralyze Batgirl, leading her to become later years Oracle, it's also heavily implied that there was sexual misconduct here, even showing pictures of a naked, unconscious Barbara Gordon to her father, Commissioner Gordon. Keeping it Batman, we've got a classic Detective Comics 371 and an issue that I personally do own. Here is a blatant form of misogyny from the late 60s. Batgirl's unable to help Robin and Batman because she's got a run in her tights, and that's more important than helping the boys. Despite the large comic audience at the time being male, even some of the dudes thought this was a little over the top. Next up, we got Man-Eaters #9, a controversial issue that published tweets from a reader who was criticizing the title, which is considered unlawful for the publisher to do, according to Twitter's privacy policy. They got in a little deep water with that one. Keeping it legal struggles, we got Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Considered the Cease and Desist DC-ist edition, limited to 500 copies, it was created in response to DC sending a cease and desist letter to Devil's Due for portraying Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez as Wonder Woman in a previous issue. Action Comics number 58. This was during a time where racist World War II propaganda was not uncommon. After the events of Pearl Harbor, anti-Japanese sentiment quite high, but sometimes that bled into children's comics in an inappropriate way. Invincible 110. Are you guys watching the show right now? I'll be curious to see if they end up ever covering this one. Controversial rape issue. Superman 261. You're going to see a couple entries on this list that blatantly portray some BDSM and over-sexualization. This, on the cover, Superman is being put into a submissive state and being declared this villain's slave. A very taboo and controversial cover. This upset a lot of parents at the time. Next, we have New Mutants 45. And this is a controversial issue with Kitty Pryde speaking at a memorial service using multiple offensive words related to ethnicity and sexual orientation. Funny thing is, this is not the last time we'll see Kitty Pryde saying something really inappropriate on this list. Another more recent Archie comics, number 511. This was a controversial cover due to Archie saying that he's in the pink, shown between two women. Most believe that this is blatant sexual innuendo, but in the pink is an idiom meaning at the height of perfection. Up next, The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, number 5. This was recalled due to a parody advertisement of a feminine hygiene product called the Marvel Miracle Douche. Another iconic cover here, we got Suspense Stories, number 22. This is a classic beheading cover. This is one of the classic covers that started the whole crackdown on comics in the first place. Parents were offended everywhere and lobbied to get this book taken out. It's also a comic that has since been homaged several times in recent years, and if you've got a copy of this, you might be sitting on some gold. Next up is The Rifleman number 10. Not only a controversial cover, it's just so blatantly obvious what this is. The way the actor is sitting there smiling, looking at it, I feel like they had to know what they were doing here. This doesn't seem subtle at all. Most people consider this to be a blatant wink at the camera, but why though? The Adventures of Superman 596. The interior art depicts LexCorp towers smoldering from an attack with an eerie similarity to the visual of the September 11th terrorist attacks. The issue was coincidentally delivered on September 12, 2001, with a statement from DC offering to accept returned books, but most retailers declined. Up next, we have an iconic Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane, number 106. Lois Lane becomes black in this issue. Within the pages, she discovers what it's like to be in the shoes of a black woman, and this almost works if it wasn't for the fact that at the end of the issue, when asked if Superman would mind if she stayed black, he blatantly has an issue with it, and it kind of undercuts the issue as a whole. Keeping it Superman's girlfriend, here we have issue 111. Now another classic cover from the age of bondage covers. Here we have Lois Lane laid out unconscious while the members of the Justice League are tying her up. This era just loved having women in bondage and helpless, forever feeding some male taboo sexual fantasies. Elektra number 3, a highly collectible comic in which if you find the first print, you're going to see some shadowy panels of Elektra without any clothes. Good for you. Up next, we got Cerebus number 186. This was controversial due to Dave Sim alienating readers by suggesting a philosophy that men are at risk of an unhappy life if they commit to long-term cohabitation with a woman. This issue resulted in a significant drop to monthly sales. Why you hating on the ladies, dude? Same one here with Birds of Prey number 49. Here we have Oracle in a rather uncomfortable position right on the cover. While a little bit more of a tame entry on this list, some people found this to be in bad taste. And after her abuse and killing joke, really wanted Oracle to catch a break. She wasn't going to get it on this cover. Here's one I have, All-Star Batman and Robin number 10, first print. Recalled due to a printing error where the black censorship bar covering the adult language was transparent enough to see the words that were meant to be left to the imagination. Next up, we have Action Comics 457. I'm not even going to say anything. Just take a quick look at this cover. Enough said. Another recent addition to the list, Dark Knight Returns: The Golden Child number 1. Variant cover by Raphael Gramba. This was right around the time of the pro-democracy riots in Hong Kong and matched the posters on the walls of the period. The fact that they used the cover art on social media to promote the release of the comic has been heavily criticized. Action Comics 869 also recalled because it shows Clark Kent drinking a beer, and oh boy, Superman can't have a beer. Isn't he like the strongest man in the world? Wouldn't that just go right through him? I don't know. Next up isn't so controversial for its cover, but the pages within. Amazing Spider-Man 545. What some people would consider the worst Spider-Man comic of all time. In order to undo his outing as Peter Parker publicly, he made a deal in order to get rid of his marriage for the last 20 years with MJ. People were outraged not only for undoing the MJ marriage continuity, but were upset that Peter would make a deal with the devil, as it felt out of character. This comic made quite the stink ethically and from a writing perspective. Next up, we got a Walmart variant, Superman Giant number 7. This is extremely controversial because it depicts the torture and murder of Lois Lane over the course of 12 pages. Can I hear a drawn out? Can I hear a unnecessary? Well, the comic community felt the same way. Action Comics 640 got into some trouble for having homophobic slurs on some protest signs. She-Hulk number 6. Here we have Star Fox on trial for sexual assault after he's accused of using his powers to seduce a married woman. Some found the material too controversial, and the media was in a buzz. Next up, Supergirl 13. This is a funny one. Variant covered by Art Germ. Everybody knows Art Germ has great female character covers. However, there is a strong debate with the sexual imagery in the way Supergirl's fingers were positioned close to her skirt and the symbolism represented by her cat. It's still up in the air if there's a little innuendo going on here. Amazing Spider-Man back on the list here with issue 512, and part of me still can't believe that this was canon for a time. This was a controversial issue because we found out that Gwen Stacy was seduced by Norman Osborn and had his kids. Nobody, and I mean nobody, liked the idea of the sweet Gwen Stacy having an affair with Norman Osborn. It just didn't make any sense and felt a little forced. This next one has no subtlety to it at all. Savage Dragon number 233, the controversial Bald is Beautiful cover, in which a woman is shown blatantly applying shaving cream to her genitalia. Next up, we might be entering into lawsuit land with Foom magazine number 2. Published 1.5 years before Wolverine's first appearance, a comic fan submitted an original character concept named the Wolverine, with regenerative abilities, a metal exoskeleton, and was the product of experimentation. The fan was not credited or compensated, and there is some question as to whether the Wolverine that we know was inspired by this fan concept. A more recent comic, Swamp Thing number 11, this was recalled due to a tentacle resembling a penis. In recent issues, it shows Anton Arcane in the background with Abby in the foreground. The old versions show a penis-shaped tentacle in between them. Amazing Spider-Man 96 and the couple issues that followed. This Spidey comic was published without the approval of the Comics Code Authority due to a subplot about drug abuse. This depiction, although controversial, showing drugs in a negative light, was well received by readers, which led to the Comics Code Authority easing up on their creative restrictions. Avengers 213 next on the list. This is a controversial issue with Hank Pym, Yellow Jacket, suspended from the Avengers for physically assaulting his wife, Janet. This was a very new issue being relayed in comics at this point, and is controversial to this day. Next up, I told you Kitty Pryde would be back. We got X-Men 196. In an effort to make a point about the offensiveness of the word mutant, Kitty Pryde uses an extremely offensive racial slur that was left uncensored. Now here's one I gotta get my hands on. I really want to read this. Heavy Metal, the July issue from 1990, which includes a 12-page comic story entitled The Wall, about Donald Trump building a border between Mexico and the US more than a quarter century before Trump was elected. I gotta read this. I gotta read that. That's crazy. Next up, we got one that my local comic book shop has had for months. I've been thinking about getting. Marvel number 5. It's a hard-to-find issue due to its low print run. Rumored to have been recalled, but it wasn't, as the artist Greg Horn can confirm. Another experimentation with drugs here in Captain America 375 got a lot of heat for Captain America getting a boost from the use of drugs. Due to his experimentation with a superhero serum, a drug called ice boosted his powers tenfold. Here's an interesting one. Squadron Supreme #1, the trade paperback collection. In accordance with the writer Mark Grunwald's wishes, his cremated ashes were mixed in with the ink in the first printing edition of this trade paperback. Who asked for that? Up next, bringing it back to the golden age, we got Weird Fantasy #18, classic story titled Judgment Day that reveals the protagonist to be an African-American man, which at the time was a risky move issued by the creators to insert the character in a position of power. Action Comics #593, another classic and controversial story here. Sleaze, an alien from Apocalypse, nearly succeeds in using mind control to produce a sex tape for Grossman Pictures starring Superman and Mr. Miracle's wife, Big Barda. Static, as in Static Shock, #25. McDuffie was trying to innocently portray this realistic depiction of a teen love affair, but they found that it was just a bit too much, and without his knowledge, they canceled that cover and put a significantly censored version, which is what everybody else got. Dwayne McDuffie found that this was a little unnecessary. He didn't feel that this was so important that it be censored. Nonetheless, he had the last say. Deadly Hands of Kung Fu #33. This has extremely mature content. Colleen Wing's breasts are fully exposed as her and Misty Knight are forced into becoming heroin addicts. Okay. Next up, NFL Super Pro #6. Here's a controversial issue that depicts sacred Native American icons in a violent misrepresentation, which caused the Hopi councilmen to demand a recall of the issue, which Marvel agreed to, but many remained in the market. 4 Kids Walk Into a Bank #1 variant. You're not going to have this copy, but if you do, good for you. There are only 50 copies in existence. The back cover reads HB2, a statement from the creator against the North Carolina law that prohibits transgender individuals from using restrooms inconsistent from their gender at birth. Here's another weird one, Avengers 200. Carol Danvers is used and becomes pregnant by a man who turns out to be the same person to whom she gives birth. Oh, Marvel, what are you doing? Flex Mentallo #4, another lawsuit here. In 2000, the Charles Atlas Corporation filed a copyright infringement lawsuit against DC for the portrayal of Flex Mentallo being a parody of the real-life Italian bodybuilder. The lawsuit was eventually dismissed, but series was out of print for over a decade and commanded a considerable amount of the secondary market. Next up, Batman Damned #1, First Edition. This was the first DC Black Label launch, which gives established creators creative freedom to explore characters and stories outside of continuity, a lot of times in a darker context. It was controversial because you could blatantly see the outline of Bruce Wayne's penis. Again, I say, who needed this? I might have needed it. Next up, Hallie the Hooters Girl, another lawsuit, recalled due to a lawsuit between Cabbage Comics and Hooters for illegally using the company's name. Here's just a funny one, New Guardians #2. You can even see him on the cover. First appearance of Snowflame, a cocaine-powered supervillain whose quote, "Cocaine is my god, and I am the human instrument of its will." Many felt that this glorified the image of cocaine. Mighty Thor #700 variant. This was controversial because it shows Stan Lee's signature stamped on the cover using ink that contained his blood, referenced to as Stan Lee's solvent DNA link. In April of 2018, news broke that former business associate of Stan's allegedly presented forged documents to his personal nurse that gave permission to draw the blood from Stan. What's going on here? And that's not the only one. Rise of the Black Panther #1 has the same Stan signature with the DNA ink. If you get your hands on this, that's great, but it's also a little gross. This next one, I'm just going to tell you the title, and I'm going to show you the cover. You figure out the rest. Hansi, the girl who loved the swastika. This one's a funny one, and I remember reading this one. Avengers #71, controversial issue with overt sexual themes. In one sequence, Hank, no longer abusing his wife, decides to start treating her right. Hank Pym shrinks down to have intimate relations with his wife, Janet, the Wasp. Some people found this to be overly sexual. Fight Comics #31, a controversial cover depicting a soldier decapitating his enemy. Psycho Killers #5, a bad taste biography of Jeffrey Dahmer. Psycho Killers #8, another bad case biography of John Wayne Gacy, the clown killer. And that brings me to one of my more heavier entries on the list with Nightwing 93. Anybody remember when this came out? Nightwing is raped by Tarantula, the villainess. There was something completely unsettling about seeing our good boy Nightwing get abused in this way. Unfortunately, DC decided to make both Bruce and Nightwing victims of rape. Talia for Bruce, Tarantula for Nightwing. Perfect Crime number 26, another comic that had to be banned. Cover art depicting child drug abuse. Kind of a precursor to Green Lantern 85. Next up, Green Lantern 54. And if you guys watch the channel, you know I'm a big Green Lantern fan, a big Kyle Rayner fan. This is the issue that shows the death of Kyle's girlfriend. And she doesn't just die. She is stuffed into Kyle's refrigerator that he finds when he gets home. Despite this now into the 90s, comics have started being controversial, but a main title like this, that was still pulling some risk. Daredevil number 48. Controversial cover due to the marquee behind Stiltman clearly reading "Ass Pain." Yeah, that's pretty metal. Next up, we have The Spirit, number 1, an old 10-cent cover depicting a very offensive interpretation of the Spirit's sidekick. Sensational She-Hulk. Honestly, you can pick your cover here, but we're going to go with number 40. Controversial comic that depicts She-Hulk jump roping naked for the first several pages. Why did they do her so dirty back then? Yikes. X-Men Gold number 1. First appearance of Rachel Gray as Prestige, but what's really noticeable about this issue is that it resulted in the termination of the artist Ardian Syaf, who hid religious political messages in the story art. Wolverine 131. Ended up having to be recalled due to a racial slur said by Wolverine about Sabretooth. First time on the list we've got Conan, number 24. It was recalled for a cover depicting a nude woman just blatantly on the cover. I gotta say, I can understand why this was recalled. Mockingbird number 8 has a controversial message embracing Bobby Morse's outspoken feminism caused by the writer Chelsea Kane. It received a lot of criticism online. Next up, a precursor to that Lobo comic I talked about, we have All Negro Comics number 1. It's the first comic book fully produced at the time by black creators, writers, artists, and the publisher. As quoted by editor Orrin C. Evans, every brushstroke and pen line in the drawings are by black artists. The inside back cover has an advertisement for issue number 2, but it was never published due to vendor refusal. Next up, another classic horror cover, Tomb of Terror 15. Graphic horror on this one of 9 comics banned by Congress. And now for one of my favorites on this entire list, we have Alf number 48. Not only is it scarce, but the cover art was deemed inappropriate, referencing an allusion to sexual misconduct. I want this comic so much, this is hilarious. How did this get made? We're almost winding down here. I thought I'd talk about all the phallic covers, like Wonder Woman 68, who once again is being held in bondage as a giant penis-shaped torpedo approaches her legs. Nick Fury Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. 34, continuing a penis-themed trend, we have the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. 34, in which a sexually defeated Nick Fury leans back while Hydra stands triumphantly with a giant metal dildo. Oh wait, that's supposed to be a gun and they've shot him? Could have fooled me. Adventure Comics number 420 shows Supergirl launching a giant penis-shaped cannon at the reader, which is more than what the casual comic reader had in mind when picking up their favorite copies of Adventure Comics. I'm so glad Supergirl was finally desexualized in more recent years. Oh wait, never mind. Last 2 comics, guys. Charlton Premiere number 2. Anybody see something a little bit funny in the middle of this cover there? Yeah, that's not subtle. That's unfortunate. It's never been recalled though, and there's only 1 edition, so you can still find this. And I thought I'd save my favorite for last. This is Bleck Comics number 176, and unlike the past few entries, Bleck number 176 doesn't have a shred of subtlety on its cover. Guys, I wanted to thank you so much for stopping by and having a laugh with me over these ridiculous covers. What did I miss? Let me know in the comments down below. Hit the like on your way out, and as always, keep on collecting.